When we look at 1920, there were 16 million acres of land, and present day, you look at there's only 2 million acres of black-owned land in the country. That's 14 million acres of land that has just disappeared from the black agricultural community.
There's a battle for land raging in Brazil. Indigenous land, untouched forest, Quilombo land. There are an estimated 6,000 Quilombos across Brazil, communities of the descendants of escaped slaves.
We have worked very hard to build these communities, and all of the Quilombola communities are living now with fear.
Quilombolas, as the residents are known, fear the Supreme Court will revoke a law in the 1988 Constitution protecting their status and claim to land.
This South African township illustrates the gaping inequalities that persist more than 3 decades after the end of apartheid. The vast grasslands of Gauteng are owned by prosperous white farmers, but houses some 7,000 black South Africans who live in small, metal homes.
At the start of the 20th century, black farmers in the United States owned over 14 million acres of land. Today, over 90% of that is gone. And it didn't just disappear. It was taken through racist laws, through intimidation, through loopholes, and more loopholes. But this isn't just an American story. By the early 1900s, Europe controlled over 90% of Africa's landmass through colonialism. And they didn't just control it. They extracted from it rubber, gold, coffee, cocoa, diamonds, you name it. They took everything and left behind poverty wrapped in independence. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the pattern was the same. Today, Afro-descendants make up over 20% of the region's population, but control less than 5% of the land. The legacy of slavery, colonialism, and exclusion still shapes who gets to own and who's left out. But something powerful is happening. From South Africa to Colombia, from California to the Caribbean, black people are rising up, fighting to reclaim land that was stolen, planting new seed of ownership, autonomy, and power. Because here's the truth. Who owns the land owns the future. And for centuries, that ownership has been denied to black communities by force, by fraud, and yes, by design. But now that's changing. From historic land returns in the US to land reform showdowns in Namibia and South Africa, to reparation movements stretching from Barbados to Brazil. A global movement is gaining steam, and black communities everywhere are standing up to say, we want our land back. So today on The Breakdown, we're digging into the global fight for black land. Why land is becoming the new front line of black liberation, the global efforts to reclaim it from Africa to the Americas, and most importantly, what needs to happen to accelerate this movement so that land becomes not just a symbol of the past, but the foundation of a freer black future. Because make no mistake, land is not just about soil. It's about sovereignty. It's about survival. It's about economic power and our ability to build generational wealth that can't be erased. We're going to break it all down. But before we dig in, a big welcome to all of our new subscribers and members. I'm so glad you're here with us. And if you're watching and haven't joined us yet, please consider this your personal invitation. Because here at Panagenius TV, we're not just building a channel, no. We're creating a global home for black stories that are told with truth, with intention, and with power. And if that matters to you, then subscribe and share our channel with your group chats. Let them know this is where real conversations about global black politics, economics, and power are happening, and they need to be a part of the action. Also, follow me on all my socials at Sandra Babu-Boateng, and let's continue the conversation 24/7. All right, now, let's break it down. Okay, so let's get one thing straight. Black people didn't just lose land. It was taken from us. Deliberately, systematically, globally. Let's rewind the clock. In Africa, colonial powers carved up the continent like a pie at the Berlin Conference in 1884. No African present, no African voice. They declared, this is British territory, that's French territory, this is Belgian territory. Never mind the kingdoms, communities, and cultures already thriving in it. By the early 1900s, Europe controlled over 90% of Africa's landmass. And no, they didn't just control it. They extracted rubber, gold, coffee, diamonds. They built railways, not for Africans, no, don't get that twisted, but to transport resources to ships bound for Europe. And when independence finally came, the land stayed locked in the hands of white settlers, multinational corporations, and political elites. Liberation didn't mean land.
Here, where southern rivers meet the sea, is the scene of America's first broken promise to Black Americans: liberty and land. Why is land so important?
It's a way that we have control of family, control of our lives.
Historian and activist Amir Jamal Touré's family traces its ties to Georgia's Sea Islands and the Carolina Low Country all the way back to the early 1800s.
For at least 3 generations.
They weren't alone. Some 40,000 freedmen were allocated land in one of the last acts of the Civil War.
Special Field Order Number 15, better known as 40 acres and a mule.
Not just a platitude, but a promise. On General Sherman's march to the sea, as many as 10,000 newly liberated people followed the Union forces. So they're emancipated.
Yes.
But
where do we go? Where do we go?
Under pressure and facing skepticism from Washington about his own loyalties, Sherman called Black pastors to his Savannah headquarters. So what is this that we're seeing?
We're seeing the meeting.
Vonette Good Walker leads the Ralph Mark Gilbert Civil Rights Museum in Savannah, home of the only illustration of the meeting.
And this is Reverend Garrison.
He was their voice.
He was the voice. He was the spokesperson for all of them.
It was Reverend Garrison Frazier's reply to Sherman that set the stage for a groundbreaking order.
You know, what do you want? What do you want from us? And he says, we want land and we want education.
The result, Special Field Order 15 reallocated land from Charleston, South Carolina down to Jacksonville and 30 miles inland, turning the property of rice plantation Confederates over to the newly emancipated, a directive which could have changed wealth distribution for generations.
It becomes our generational wealth of being able to pass something down to our children.
Instead, it became a promise broken. Sandy Darity and Kirsten Mullen study the history of and potential for restorative justice, beginning with those 40 acres. Draw that line for me to reparations conversations today. Are they really connected?
Oh, absolutely.
The couple's books outline a clear case for the nation's debt to Black America.
One of the key goals of a true reparations project would be the elimination of the racial wealth gap. And that figure at the moment is on the low end, $14 trillion.
A mind-bending sum, but the researchers point to billions, even trillions that Washington deems worth it for corporate bank bailouts, agricultural prices, COVID relief. By their accounting, an average of $850,000 paid to each family descended from enslaved Africans might only scratch the surface of the nation's true debt. What does America as a society owe Black Americans?
Restitution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, restitution. And the capacity to be able to participate on an equal basis in this society.
We hand out checks today. Can they accomplish that?
Well,
They can go a long way.
A whole lot. Yeah.
So could land. And what happened to those 40 acres for Black freedmen? Well, after Lincoln's death, his successor, Andrew Johnson, quickly rescinded the field order, reneging on the promise. If those 40 acres had stayed with those people who were supposed to get it,
we would have altered the entire dynamic of economic inequality by race in the United States.
In the U.S., after emancipation, formerly enslaved black people were promised 40 acres and a mule. Heard of that? Well, that promise was snatched away. Still, by 1910, black Americans had acquired more than 14 million acres of farmland, mostly in the South. But then came Jim Crow, violent white mobs, laws that made it nearly impossible to access loans or legal protections. Heirs' property loopholes that allowed courts to sell black family land out from right under them. Today, black farmers own less than 1% of U.S. farmland. Let that sink in.
There's a battle for land raging in Brazil. Indigenous land, untouched forest, Quilombo land. There are an estimated 6,000 Quilombos across Brazil, communities of the descendants of escaped slaves.
We have worked very hard to build these communities, and all of the Quilombola communities are living now with fear.
Quilombolas, as the residents are known, fear the Supreme Court will revoke a law in the 1988 Constitution protecting their status and claim to land.
The Brazilian state needs to recognize this group's rights, most importantly, the right to land. Then all the Quilombolas' other social rights should follow, their right to schooling, to health care, and full citizenship.
The communities were founded in remote regions far from the sugar plantations they'd escaped from. They mixed with indigenous people and developed a new culture.
Their ancestors escaped slavery to live in freedom and try to build a future in remote communities like this one. Their fear now is that those hard-won freedoms are under threat from hungry landowners and a society reluctant to recognise their rights.
The current government is supported by agri-businesses and wealthy landowners. Many don't recognise the definition of Quilombos and say land claims should be better regulated, that most Quilombos don't have official land claims. The Quilombolos say they face their greatest threat since the 1888 abolition of slavery.
Everything that is ours is here. Our land, our agriculture, our way of life, our way of doing things. Of course our people do not want to lose all of that.
At least 14 Quilombola leaders have been killed this year in land disputes.
It's a process of resistance that's prevailed for more than 400 years. With all that's been happening in our politics recently, that resistance has to grow a lot more.
Brazil, the world's fifth largest country with more than 8.5 million square kilometres, seems so vast. But in court and on the land, it's still struggling to accommodate its many diverse communities. Daniel Schweiner, Al Jazeera, Sao Paulo State, Brazil.
In Latin America and the Caribbean, after slavery was abolished, formerly enslaved Africans weren't given land or compensation. Instead, they were often pushed off the very plantations that they built, forced to rent, squat, or become sharecroppers on land that they once worked for free. In places like Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad, land remained concentrated in the hands of former slave owners and colonial elites. To this day, more than 70% of arable land in many Caribbean nations is owned by a small minority, often foreign or white-descended elites. In Brazil, which has the largest black population outside of Africa, nearly 75% of Quilombola, Afro-Brazilian communities still lack formal land titles, even though the Brazilian Constitution has recognized their land rights since 1988. In Colombia, Afro-Colombians, who make up about 10% of the population, live primarily in the Pacific coastal region, rich in biodiversity and natural resources. They hold over 5 million hectares in collective land titles, but those lands are under constant threat from mining, lodging, and paramilitary violence. The heart of the matter, the story is the same everywhere you go. Colonization, displacement, extraction, land became concentrated in the hands of colonial elites. And even after independence, most nations lacked the political or financial capital to truly redistribute land equitably. Black communities tried to reclaim what they could, building villages and cooperatives, but it was always an uphill battle, and the world moved on in silence. But now that silence is being broken, and the fight for land is back at the center of the Black freedom struggle. The fight for Black land is no longer just a historical wound. It's a live battle. And from the rural villages of Namibia to beachfronts in California, Black communities are fighting back through the courts, through policy, and sometimes through protest. Let's break it down by region.
This South African township illustrates the gaping inequalities that persist more than 3 decades after the end of apartheid. The vast grasslands of Gauteng are owned by prosperous white farmers, but houses some 7,000 Black South Africans who live in small, metal homes like these.
We will not be deterred.
To redress it, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed an expropriation act last month. It allows the government, in rare cases, to confiscate land without compensation. It's reignited racial tensions and caught the attention of U.S. President Donald Trump. The mostly white-owned farms around Gauteng are a small piece of the bigger picture. White South Africans make up about 8% of the population, but they hold about 3/4 of privately owned land in the country. In contrast, only 4% of privately held land is owned by Black South Africans, who make up nearly 80% of the country's 60 million residents. One conflict that arises is that Black herders need grassland to graze their animals. Shadrach Maseko lives on the white-owned Mayorskap farm. His grandparents came here in the early 1900s to seek work as farm hands. The farm had seen several white owners who had been happy for them to stay and work. But in the past decade, Maseko and 14 other families living here have been in a dispute with the new white owners over grazing rights for their 30-odd cows.
First of all, when a white man comes and leases the farm, first of all, you must remove your cattle. All of them. He doesn't want the cattle. Nothing. All of them. So maybe it's the criteria they are using to remove all the Black people on the farms.
For many Black people, disputes like these reflect a legacy of inequality left by the colonial and apartheid eras. In 1913, a Native Land Act gave most farmland to whites, mostly Afrikaners of Dutch descent, leaving just 13% to Blacks. Then, in 1950, the Afrikaner National Party passed a law removing 3.5 million Black people from their ancestral lands.
South Africa. As of 2025, Black South Africans, who make up over 80% of the population, own only 4% of privately held land, while white South Africans, comprising about 8% of the population, own the majority of the country's farmland. In January 2025, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the Expropriation Act into law. This legislation allows for the expropriation of property for public purposes or in the public interest, including land reform, with provisions for nil compensation in certain areas. The law has become a point of contention between South Africa and the United States. In February 2025, President Donald Trump issued an executive order halting U.S. aid to South Africa, citing the Expropriation Act as enabling the seizure of land from white farmers without compensation. Trump went even further, accusing South Africa of committing white genocide, a claim widely condemned as inflammatory and baseless. The move has ignited global debate and raised serious questions. Will South Africa hold the line on land reform? Or will it retreat under U.S. pressure, especially after the unusually intense closed-door meeting between President Ramaphosa and Trump at the White House last month?
This was recorded on July 15th, 2022 at 8 a.m., and it is my honor to be here to present a certified copy to the family.
Nearly 100 years after a prime piece of Manhattan Beach real estate was taken from a black family by the city of Manhattan Beach, Los Angeles County gave the property back to their descendants.
I've been asked, is this reparations? And I say, hell no. This is returning property that was rightfully owned by a family.
This is a victory for the faithful and the oppressed in this country that has been long in coming for 450 years.
In 1912, Charles and Willa Bruce bought land in Manhattan Beach that they built into a popular beachside resort for African Americans. But Bruce family supporters say the white city government at the time didn't want the black family business in their town. After years of conflict, the city took the property by eminent domain in 1924. The property, now owned by LA County, is today estimated to be worth about $20 million and is once again owned by Bruce family members.
Justice for Bruce's Beach!
In the U.S., one of the most high-profile land returns in recent memory happened in Bruce's Beach, California. In the 1920s, a thriving black-owned beach resort in Manhattan Beach was seized by the city through eminent domain. Nearly 100 years later, in 2022, the land was returned to the descendants of Willa and Charles Bruce, marking a historic precedent. In the South, black families continue to lose land due to heirs' property laws, where land passed down without a will becomes vulnerable to legal exploitation. Developers can buy out one heir, force a partition sale, and walk away with land for pennies on the dollar. This loophole has cost black families billions in generational wealth. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, the fight for black land is deeply tied to the legacy of colonialism, slavery, and systemic erasure. So in the Caribbean community, CARICOM, has emerged as a global leader in the reparations movement. Through its 10-point reparatory justice plan, CARICOM is demanding that former colonial powers like Britain, France, and the Netherlands provide tangible reparations, including land redistribution, debt cancellation, and repatriation support. Land justice sits at the heart of this plan, not just as a symbolic repair, but as a material foundation for black economic independence. In Colombia and Brazil, Afro-descendant communities are fighting to protect ancestral lands from encroachment by agribusiness, mining companies, and paramilitary forces. Whether through courtrooms, parliaments, or community action, one thing is clear. The land fight is active, it's global, and it's personal. So now we know the history. We see the current movement, but the real question is, what is it going to take to actually win this fight? To not just reclaim land, but to protect it, build on it, and pass it forward. Let's break it down. 1, we need to prioritize legal reform and land titling. See, too many black communities, especially in Africa, Latin America, and the rural U.S. South, live on land without a clear legal ownership. No title, no protection, no leverage, no future. Land reform without legal reform is a revolving door of dispossession. Number 2, we need innovative collective ownership models that work. Community land trusts, farming cooperatives, tribal councils. We need to normalize collective black land ownership, especially in areas where individual titling isn't culturally or economically sustainable. When we own land together, we protect it longer and fight harder to keep it. Number 3, the fight for reparations should become even more urgent, with land at the center. Land must be a central demand in global reparations movements, not just symbolic cash payouts or programs. We're talking about land restitution where possible, land access for housing, agriculture, and conservation, land sovereignty for indigenous and African descended peoples. And number 4, we need to push for financial access and infrastructure. Listen, we can own the land, But without capital to build, grow, or farm it, it truly means nothing. Government and banks must be pushed to expand credit to black landowners and farmers, invest in rural infrastructure, especially in post-slavery and post-colonial zones, fund education and training in land management and agribusiness, yes. And then finally, we need strong political will and a Pan-African strategy. None of this happens without political courage. We need leaders who are willing to push bold land reforms, even when it angers Western powers. A coordinated effort between diaspora communities that back land movements in Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. Demand for global platforms like the AU, CARICOM, and the UN to recognize land dispossession as a human rights issue. Because this isn't just about ownership. It's about sovereignty. It's about saying the land is ours and we're not asking, we're reclaiming. The fight for black land isn't just about the past. It's about the power to shape the future, to feed ourselves, to house ourselves, to teach our children that the ground beneath them is theirs and no one can take it. Land is liberation. And that's why this fight is the new front line of black economic freedom worldwide. So my people, where do we go from here? From South Africa to Georgia, from Jamaica to Colombia. Black people are fighting to reclaim land that was stolen, withheld, or quietly stripped away. And this fight, no, it's not just about acres and deeds. It's about memory. It's about power. It's about the right to exist fully, freely, and with dignity on the land that your ancestors bled on, bled for. For centuries, we were told we didn't belong, pushed off the land, locked out of ownership, made into laborers on land we once called home. But now, a new generation is rising with maps, titles, lawsuits, cooperatives, and microphones saying, no more. Because we understand something now. Land is not just a backdrop, it's the battleground. And if we are to win the fight for economic liberation, if we are serious about generational wealth, real reparations, and true independence, then we must plant our feet on solid ground and say with conviction, this land is ours, and we're not leaving. Time you hear someone talk about reparations, ask them, where's the land? The next time a government claims to care about equity, ask them, who owns the land? And the next time you hear someone say black wealth matters, make sure they understand. It starts with land. That's it for today's breakdown, my people. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think land should be the central demand in global reparations movements? What stories of land loss or land reclamation have impacted your community? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and let's keep building power from the ground up. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng. Until next time, take care. Hey you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.